Okay, this is going to be my take on making English muffins. I'm going to start by going over the hardware that I use to bake the English muffins. First, a large bowl. This is a Vollrath, V-O-L-L-R-A-T-H, 8-quart. Next will be baker's sheets. These are Nordic Ware aluminum half sheets. Next, the silicone mats. I need 3 of them. They're silicone baking mats. Those are from M-Mat, M-M-A-T. Egg rings. These are Norpro 3.75 inch by 3.75 inch by 1 inch. And then we get to a dough whisk, which is from Origin Bosses. And then these are pretty generic, a bench scraper and a plastic scraper, bowl scraper. And then I'm going to describe later on why I need this third baking sheet, because I'm making 24 English muffins. This baking sheet will be initially to weigh down the English muffins in the egg rings, and then the cast iron pan is to add a little more weight to keep them down. Then I will be using a different bowl for rising, just because it's a little bit better shape for the rising, and then bowl covers, and these bowl covers are from Kitchen Strong. All of these can be found on Amazon. Everything that I got, well, except for the KitchenAid mixing bowl, I got from Amazon. Now we'll go on to the ingredients for the English muffins. Start with the semolina flour, which will be used in the process a little bit later. Have 18 grams of bread machine yeast or instant yeast, 18 grams of kosher salt, 46 grams of sugar, and 920 grams of bread flour, which I already have in the bowl. You can use all-purpose flour, but I usually use bread flour. Going on to the wet ingredients, have 550 grams of whole milk, have 2 eggs, which I like to beat first, have 46 grams of unsalted butter, softened and cut into little pieces. And then finally, about 120 grams of sourdough starter. Now this sourdough starter, I fed it about 3 hours ago, so it's very active now, it's very bubbly. It's ready to help out with the flavor and with a little bit with the rising of the English muffins, although most of that is the yeast. But definitely there's a difference in flavor with the sourdough starter, so I kind of consider that my secret ingredient. It's not necessary. You can make the English muffins without, but it really improves the flavor to have the sourdough starter in them. Now we'll go on to the fun part, the mixing and kneading of the English muffin dough. So dump in the dry ingredients. Mix them up a little bit. Go on to the wet ingredients. I earlier said I wanted to show you the sourdough starter, so you have a look to see what it looks like when it's nice and bubbly and ready to go. I said earlier about 120 grams. I don't actually weigh the sourdough starter. I use a half-cup measure. It's not that critical. And I found that if you wet the measure before you put it in the starter doesn't adhere quite as much to it, and most of it will come out. I used to do this in a KitchenAid mixer, but what I found with the dough hook, what I found was I would be able to knead it in the mixer for about 2 or 3 minutes, but the mixer that I have is not real heavy duty, and it would start walking around and I'd have to hold it, and I ended up just finding that it's easier for me to knead it the last few minutes that it needs to be by hand, that it needs to be kneaded. And then I just decided, well, I'm going to knead it for that many minutes anyway. I'm just going to start it in this bowl here and knead it by hand from the very beginning. It needs to be kneaded for 10 minutes. Because I added the sourdough starter, it's actually going to be a little bit sticky once I start kneading it for a time. So I will be adding flour just enough to keep it from being too sticky onto the countertop. So I started out kneading it in the bowl just to get it formed. And just start kneading it on the countertop. Add flour as necessary. Okay, that 10 minutes flew by. Now what I like to do is put a little bit of canola oil in the mixing bowl and then put the dough in, kind of mix it around, get it coated with the oil, and then put the plastic cover over it. And then I'm going to put it in the oven. The oven light is going to be on, and it'll rise for about an hour and a half. It's been an hour and a half, and the dough has approximately doubled, so it's time to go on to the next step in the process, which is to cut it into 76 to 77 gram balls and put them in the egg rings. First I'll sprinkle some semolina flour on the baking pan. Now I start using the bench scraper to cut into 76 gram balls. And that one's 79, so I'll take a little bit off. Now 75, 77, could be 76 or 77. Once I get to either 76 or 77, I'm done. So then I kind of form it, not into an absolute ball, a little bit flattened. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then into the ring it goes. And then we're just going to continue doing that. 72, needs a little bit more. 74, 75. Yep. All right, 76. Now this is a departure from the standard way, I guess the traditional way of doing English muffins, which is at this point, this is the way I originally did it, is I would roll the dough out, and then I had a cookie cutter that I would cut it into rings, and then let it rise from there. And then I would griddle it. That's the traditional way, is you griddle it, and you have to get the temperature of the griddle just perfect and the cook time just perfect, and even then it's very difficult to get a consistent cook. In my experience, you end up maybe with a little bit of soft dough in the middle, and inevitably after you griddle them and take them off, they fall a little bit. And so the technique that I'm showing here was actually thought up by my son-in-law Pete, and so I kind of knew a good idea when I saw it, heard about it, and I started doing it the same way. You get a lot more consistent product if you do it this way. So what I'm going to end up doing is then baking these. All right, that's 12. So at this point, I need to move the rings to the other baking sheet. Add some semolina flour to it. And then do the next 12. All right, that's the next 12, and you see I have a little baby left over. I like to have a little bit left over rather than come up a little short, so this particular recipe I usually wind up with a one that weighs about 40 pounds or so 40 grams, so about half of one. All right, then one thing I didn't do with the other 12 is sprinkle some semolina flour on the top of it. And the other thing I need to do bring the first one back over. I need to transfer these rings back because the first ones that I formed are going to be the first ones to bake. And I only have 12 of these rings. And we'll let these rise for about a half an hour, and they'll puff up a little bit more and they'll come up a little bit over the top of the ring. So sprinkle some semolina on them too. I will see you in a half an hour. It has been a half an hour. As you can see, these have risen quite a bit in that time. I have actually preheated the oven. I started the oven preheating about 15 minutes ago. So it is at 450, which is the temperature that I'll be cooking at. My oven, I believe, is a little cool. So you may find that 440 or 445 might be better for you. For me, for this oven, it's 450. You'll just have to experiment and see. So I put the silicone mat on top. I will mention that parchment paper can also work, but I like the silicone. It's reusable and easy to clean. Now I'm going to put the other baking sheet on top and press it down. Now I'll put the frying pan on top of that. Now I'll put the English muffins into the oven. I like to use the second to lowest shelf for these. And I will bake them for 6 minutes. 6 minutes, no more, no less. Got to be really accurate with this. It has been 6 minutes, so it's time to take the sheet and the frying pan off the top, the weight, and then let them bake for another 6 minutes. It has been 12 minutes, so it's time to take the muffins out. You can see that they are nicely browned on top. They've risen up a little bit above the egg rings, so I'm very happy with how they've turned out. So hopefully this perspective will give you an idea that the muffins have risen just a little bit above the egg rings. So the reason that I put the baking sheet on top with the frying pan for the first 6 minutes is to allow the muffins to fill up the egg rings, and then I take the baking sheet off, which allows them to puff up a little bit above the egg rings. When I was originally doing this, I had put the baking sheet on for the entire 12 minutes, and that did not allow them to expand over the top of the egg rings, and my wife complained and said that they were like eating hockey pucks. So I altered my technique to allow them to expand a little bit above the rings. So now I'll repeat the same technique and method for the other 12 muffins, and that'll be the end. Good morning. I like to start my mornings with a nice English muffin, perhaps with some homemade strawberry jam, or with this caviar spread that we get from a company called Krinos, Tara Musalata. Very delicious with the sourdough English muffin. and a cup of coffee. It's a wonderful way to start the morning. Very delicious. I hope you have enjoyed this video.